this works any better. Yeah, same problem basically. So no idea if you can see or hear me now. I can see my PowerPoint, but I can't see the stream. So you can see me live. Okay. Like, okay. I mean, if this is working, yeah, is this working okay? Give me a minute just to check everything, yeah? Okay. Allow me to calm myself after a rather stressful 45 minutes of faffing around with technology. So, hello, my name's Hugh Dellar. I'm a teacher and teacher trainer based here in North London, and I'm also the co-author of the Outcomes series of course books. And what I'm really going to be talking about for the next sort of 45 minutes or so, I guess, we'll see how we go on with the time, is some basic rules of thumb, some basic principles that I've come to believe over the years during my teaching career. Okay, and I've called these 5 golden rules. Before we begin, I should just stress, I guess, that I'm not saying that if you're not doing these 5 golden rules, you're a bad teacher. And I'm not suggesting that all of you should immediately switch and start copying all of the golden rules that I'm suggesting. What I am saying, I guess, is these are things I've come to believe, and I'll talk a bit about why I came to believe them. And if there are things from my own practice and my own experience that you find useful or that resonate with you in some kind of way, then hopefully they'll give you something to take away into your own classrooms. Okay? I've been teaching a long time, 28 years this year, I believe. And I first started teaching in 1993. By 1995, I was doing my Delta. And when I was doing my sort of year-long part-time Delta, I read a lot, as you do when you're doing a Delta. And probably the book that had the single biggest impact on me was a book by Michael Lewis called The Lexical Approach. And it was basically, as I understood it, an approach to language, a way of thinking about and looking at language, based on this idea that language wasn't just grammatical structures that we dropped bits of vocabulary into. Instead, what drives communication, what drives language itself, is primarily vocabulary, and grammar attaches itself to the lexis. And this whole idea confused and excited and bemused and interested me in equal measure. And as I came to start to think about what the implications for the classroom might be of such a way of thinking about language, I was kind of confused about why the lexical approach said this doesn't require a major sea change. This is just something you can do with the way you're teaching already. Because for me, once I started changing the way I looked at language, it had a really radical impact on the way I started thinking about classroom practice and what was important in terms of classroom practice. And what I'm really going to do is just to kind of break down into 5 kind of bite-sized chunks, if you like, what I learned about the lexical approach, okay? The first thing that I kind of concluded or came to believe was it's better if we use lexical materials. Now, you might be sitting there cynically thinking, you're a course book writer, of course you're going to say that. And, you know, I have to hold my hands up and say I have a vested interest at this point. Lots of course books nowadays will tell you that they have a lexical syllabus. But for me, it doesn't just mean a lexical syllabus bolted onto the traditional grammatical kind of syllabus that drives most course books. It basically means material which are rich in useful language that students might want and need to use. One of the implications of this, I think, is probably less so-called authentic texts, because often they're poorly graded, they've got a lot of specific cultural information, they don't contain language which is particularly useful for students at a certain level. And so I think what it often means is texts which are authentically written for language learners. It also means rethinking what kind of listenings we have in course books. I think still to this day, we have too many listenings in course books which are basically transactional. They're about giving information. They're about getting things done. They're about solving problems, or, you know, giving information about the world or sorting things out. What you don't get as much in course books is just basic interactional chit chat, you know, people just sitting around talking about stuff. And I think we still don't take the spoken language seriously enough in language teaching. Also, I think it means when you do have listening texts or reading texts, it's always bringing texts into the classroom material that students really want to talk about. Texts, whether written or listening based, that serve as a springboard for both language work and language exploration, but also for discussion and for speaking. Once you've got these different kinds of texts, these texts written authentically for language learners and written at the level of the students that you're teaching, with space built in for students to talk about things, you can exploit these texts with lexically oriented language exercises, which may mean, obviously, on a very basic level, looking at words, particularly maybe at beginner level, you're often looking at single words, okay? It'll also mean looking at collocations, verbs and nouns that go together, adjectives and nouns that go together, verb, adjective, nouns that go together. And, you know, that can be all kinds of things. It can be things like, it played a huge role in my childhood. The weather here's really muggy at the moment, really humid. It'll mean looking at lots of fixed and semi-fixed expressions, particularly in spoken language. These are really common. You know, just things like, what was it like? Was it any good? It wasn't as good as I thought it would be. It wasn't as expensive as I was worried it would be. It wasn't as hot as we were hoping it would be. You know, where they're kind of semi-fixed, but open to little changes. I think it also means starting to take spoken grammar more seriously. And there are loads of things we do with grammar in everyday spoken English that don't often get taught in course books. Just one simple example. I was teaching once an academic English class, and one of my students came in late and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry I'm late. The underground was very crowded. Consequently, I couldn't enter," which made me chuckle a little bit. So I said, yeah, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you got on the tube in the end, but not consequently. And the student immediately corrected himself, well, thought he was correcting himself, and said, the underground was very crowded, therefore I could not enter, which made me laugh even more. I said, no, it doesn't work like that. And he said, why? Cause and effect. It's like, yeah, there is cause and effect in kind of formal academic English. In spoken English, it's different. In spoken English, you'd say something like, the tube was so crowded, I couldn't get on. Okay, so plus adjective plus result. And we do that all the time in everyday speech. You know, it's so hot up here, it feels like a sauna. Oh, he was so drunk, he could hardly stand up. I was so angry, I could have killed him. That's really, really common in speech, but we don't see that taught as grammar because it's not part of the traditional canon of grammar. Because, as I said, we don't take spoken language seriously enough. It also means teaching examples of grammar as vocabulary. At a very low level, that might mean teaching how long have you been doing that before you teach the present perfect continuous. At a higher level, it might mean, once you've already seen and studied and done exercises on the present perfect continuous, teaching things like, oh, I've been meaning to for ages, but I just haven't got round to it yet. I've been meaning to go there. I've been meaning to see that. I've been meaning to do that for ages, but I just haven't had time. But I just haven't got round to it yet. And teaching those examples of the grammar in action as chunks of language, bits of vocabulary, phrases that you can use in particular conversations. This brings me to my second golden rule, which is basically to do with kind of developing students' linguistic awareness. And I think part of the problem is that lots of students and maybe some teachers sometimes come to class believing that what they really need to do to learn English is learn all the grammar rules, do Raymond Murphy's English grammar in use, and then learn lots of single words. Okay? And part of our job is to combat that idea and kind of subtly reorient their way of thinking. Part of the way we do this is by encouraging students to notice which words go together. And we can do this by giving students typical ways of saying things, by showing them, yeah, this is a fixed phrase. Oh, you can vary this phrase a little bit like this. Just one example from an earlier class. We were talking about accidents. And one of the students was saying, if a metal bar falls on my head, what do I then say? The impact hurt me. I thought the impact would break my nose. So no, you just say, a metal bar fell on my head and nearly broke my nose. A metal bar fell on my head and knocked out 2 teeth. A metal bar fell on my head and cut my forehead open. There was blood everywhere. I'm sorry. So it's basically just showing them these are the typical ways that you talk about these things with the grammar and the vocabulary combined. With lots of students, I think it's also making them aware, not that translation is bad, because I don't think it is. I think word for word translation is bad. And I think translating single words is a bad thing. If you're going to translate, at least translate pairs of words, chunks, phrases, whole sentences. And that way, often, you notice the kind of way in which words work grammatically differently from language to language. So maybe if you give a sentence like, I want to study art, but my parents want me to study business. You get students to translate that into their own language. When they translate it back, what lots of students will do is to say, my parents want that I study business, because they're translating the direct grammar of how that word works in L1 with grammar, and they're not remembering or paying sufficient attention to the different way in which that word patterns grammatically in L2. What this means, I think, is recognizing that the input we provide as teachers, the board work, the examples we give, the teacher talk, has a really central role to play. Years ago, when I first started teaching, if I was teaching something like day trip, I would probably just have written on the board, a day trip, brackets, N for noun, okay? When I first read the lexical approach, I started thinking, oh, collocations. So then I would probably have written to go on a day trip, despite the fact that no one actually needs to say to go on a day trip. It's not what you do with the language. Now, what I'm always thinking about is, okay, I can explain it. A day trip is when you leave your town or city and go somewhere for shopping, for sightseeing or whatever, and then you come back later in the evening. So it's like a one-day visit to another town or another city. So maybe if you live in London, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, this Saturday, I'm going on a day trip to where, for example? Brighton. Yeah, that's a good one. Anywhere else? Yeah, I'm going on a day trip to, could be Cambridge. Okay. I'm going on a day trip to, could be Oxford as well. Good. Okay. And maybe write these examples up on the board to show students Here's the grammar and the vocabulary in combination in a way that you yourselves might use it. Other ways that you can foster awareness, and the first one is much easier in a physical, real world classroom than it is on the internet, which is to do with watching what students are underlining. Okay, when they're reading or when they're doing exercises and you see them with the magic highlighter in their hands, go round and check. And often what students do is underline the wrong things or half of the phrase. So you might have a sentence like, do you fancy going out somewhere tonight? And they've underlined fancy. Well, there's no point looking up the word fancy. What you have to recognize here is it's not fancy, it's do you fancy going out somewhere tonight? It means, do you want to go out somewhere tonight? How would you translate the whole sentence? Okay, good. In the same way, they might say something like, you know, he put an ad in the personal column of the newspaper. You don't want them to look up the word column. At the bare minimum, you want them to notice personal column, but probably you want them to notice put an ad in the personal column of the new newspaper. Other things you can do is after students have finished texts, you can get them to underline new collocations, new chunks, new expressions. When you're writing material yourself, rather than focusing on were there any words you don't know, much better to focus on, did you notice the missing words that go in these gaps? Here are 10 sentences using chunks from the reading. Can you remember the missing prepositions? Here are 10 verbs from the reading. Which nouns did they go with? Here are 10 adjectives from the listening. Can you remember the nouns that they were describing? Okay, so what you're doing then is you're basically saying, were you noticing? Were you paying attention? Did you pay sufficient attention to the way the language was being used, not just to the meaning? The third kind of rule of thumb I've come to adopt is thinking very carefully about how we deal with error. I still think far too many teachers jump on students far too quickly for really small errors that basically don't matter. When I was a younger teacher, I used to, when students would do speaking, I would always kind of say, right, that was great, but you made 13 grammar mistakes. Let's look at them together and correct them all. And what the message I was sending to the students is your English is substandard and error ridden, and I'm listening to you, waiting for a chance to correct you. I don't now believe this is particularly useful. I think actually error shouldn't be an excuse for punitive correction and more grammar. Instead, error is just a way of starting from where the students are at. And actually often students make what you might think of as grammar mistakes simply because they don't know better ways of saying things. Here's a sentence one of my students once said during a pair work activity in the class. They had the same course book, but different versions. And one student suddenly said, your book is a new book, which is similar with my old book, but has been improved and more up to date. Well, you could correct that grammatically. You could say, yes, the correct version is your book is a new book, which is similar to my old book, but which has been improved and made more up to date. Or you could just say, yeah, you've got the second edition. Oh, this is a new edition. If you don't know that piece of lexis, that piece of vocabulary, well, you fall back on plan B, which is putting together messages using words and grammar. So often, actually, what you might think of initially as grammar mistakes are mistakes that are caused by a kind of lexical deficiency, if you like. What this means, I think, is rather than punitive correction, reformulating is much, much better. And it basically means when the student comes to class and says, oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't make my homework, instead of saying make, what you do is to say, oh no, you didn't do your homework. How come? Okay. And what you're doing there is two things. You're responding to the message first. You're responding to the student as a human being first. You're recognizing that there might be some serious reason why the student didn't do their homework. You know, maybe their grandmother's got COVID, who knows? So you're doing that, but you're also using your voice and your teacher talk to give their own output back to them better. You know, you didn't do your homework. How come? What happened? In the same way, when a student comes to class and says, oh, sorry, I'm late, I lost my bus. Oh, no, that's okay. I'm glad you're here now. Let's have a quick look at how to say that better. So, sorry, I'm late. I missed my bus. Good. Anything else you can miss that might make you late? Yeah, I missed my train. I missed my connection. Any other reasons why you might be late? Sleep too long. Yeah. So, sorry, I'm late. I overslept. Any other reason? Alarm clock, no good. Yeah, sorry, I'm late. My alarm clock didn't go off. Okay. Same way, student comes in. Sorry, I no come class last week. My mother, she braked the leg. Oh no, your mum broke her leg. How? What happened? And then what you do is you work with what comes back. Maybe you write on the board a little conversation. Sorry, I didn't come to class last week. My mum broke her leg. Oh God, I'm so sorry. How did that happen? Oh, she fell over in the street. You know, is her leg in plaster? Yeah, for the next 6 weeks. Oh, no, take off some more time if you need to. Okay. And I think that kind of reformulation, whether you're doing it orally or written, is really the way in which students progress, because they see how words and grammar combine better to express the meanings that they've been trying to express. What this also means is just letting student interlanguage control the class a bit more. As a coursebook writer, one of the questions I really hate is, how long does it take to do your coursebook? As though there's supposed to be one fixed answer to this. My official answer is, how long's your course? 90 hours. Oh, that's the perfect period of time to use the coursebook. My honest answer as a teacher is, well, it depends. It depends what you do with the material, and it depends what happens in your class. Sometimes a page could take 2 hours. Sometimes it could take 3 hours. If I only have 90 minutes to do 2 pages, I could probably do it in 90 minutes. But the idea that a piece of material has a fixed period of time that it has to take, I just think is wrong. Often what happens is when you're explaining things in class, students connect the new language to something that they already know. So the other day I was teaching an intermediate level class and the word stressed out came up. And one of my students asked, quite sensibly, so stressed out, like nervous? 20 years ago when I was a young teacher, those questions used to terrify me. And I would probably have said, yes, it is a bit like nervous. Look it up in your dictionary at home and develop your student autonomy. Now, the way I understand those questions is the students are basically kind of saying, can I quit the full screen presentation? Like that, Anna, is that what you mean? Yeah, you sure? Okay. Sorry, let me just check what this message means that I've just received through. Okay. I don't know. Can you see that now or not? Let's see. Sorry, I'll just give you a minute to see if you can see the presentation. Let me know if you can see it or not. Okay. You can see it now. Well, you couldn't see it before. I hate this platform with a passion. God, it is the least user-friendly, least intuitive platform I have ever used in my life. Okay, so let's get started again, okay? Sorry that you couldn't see it. So for me now, what I'm thinking about when students ask me these kinds of questions, like, you know, what's the difference between stressed out and nervous? I think what they're really asking me is, I kind of understand the meaning of this new word. It's kind of similar to this old word. Could you just clarify how they're similar and how they're different? So what I now do is to say, okay, so if you're really stressed out, it's a bit like me now using this platform. You're kind of pulling your hair out. You're wondering why you stopped smoking. And usually it's because of work. So you might say, I'm really busy at work at the moment. I'm really stressed out about it. You can also say that things are stressful. So learning to use a new digital platform can be very stressful. Okay. You might give an example like this. So what do you do? Oh, wow, that must be really stressful. For example, what kind of jobs do you think might go here? I'm a doctor. Wow, that must be really stressful. I'm a pilot. That must be really stressful. Probably you're thinking, I'm a teacher. That must be really stressful. Trust me, students never suggest this as an option. Sorry to tell you. What I might then do is to look at when you might be nervous. Okay, so sorry, I'm just going to flick between the two screens. You might say, yeah, usually you get nervous before something. So, you know, maybe you get really nervous before flying. Okay, any other times you might get really nervous before what? Yeah, before exams, before interviews, maybe before going on a date. Yeah. Students might then say, can I say a person is nervous? Yeah, like if you're a very, very nervous kind of person who never really seems to relax, you're always fidgeting, you're always kind of moving around, and you have a kind of nervous energy about you. Yeah, okay. And what I might then do is to give some extra examples. What you notice here is, even though the language itself is, let's say, intermediate, the grammar, present simple, present simple, present simple, must be plus adjective, present simple, present simple. Okay, I mean, a lot of quite sophisticated language, quite complicated language, is grammatically elementary. So I think letting students ask questions and responding to them, it gives the students a sense of control. It gives the students more information about how the language they know already is similar to and different to the language that you're trying to give them. It gives them fully grammaticalized and lexicalized examples of how that language works, and it keeps you on your toes because you're constantly thinking about, well, that's a good question. What is the difference between stressed out and nervous? What is the difference between implication and consequence? I had one with my proficiency group this morning. What's the difference between a spur and an incentive? What's the difference between it acts as a spur to doing something and it acts as an incentive to do something? Well, those kind of questions are great because they keep you as a teacher constantly thinking about the language, constantly learning more about the language, and constantly improving your own ability to explain and exemplify the language. Golden rule number 4. This is the exciting part of the talk, the XXX rule. Basically, this is just something that I think teachers should generally be aiming to do when dealing with new vocabulary, okay? It's not enough just to tell students to look things up. They can do that in a dictionary without paying a teacher, okay? I don't think even it's enough to give an explanation and maybe to write the new words up on the board. I think when we're dealing with new vocab, things that students ask us about from vocab exercises, from texts in the course book, from things they've come across at home. We need to explain the vocabulary in the context in which they meet it. We need to give an example, and we then, if we can, use the class to help us expand upon this where possible. And here's an example. One of my students recently came to class early and said, "Can I just ask you, what does guilty mean?" Now, it's easy in that situation to fall into a trap and say, if you go to court and they decide that you did the crime you're charged with, they find you guilty. The reason it's a trap is because, well, the meaning of guilty depends on the context, okay? Being found guilty is one thing, but there are other meanings. So my first question is always, well, what's the context? It's here in the workbook from the homework. I felt really guilty about it. So if you feel really guilty about something, you feel bad because you did something bad. And now you think, why did I do that? I'm a bad person. Or maybe you didn't do something and you think, oh, I should have done that. Why didn't I do that? I'm a bad person for not doing that. And you feel really guilty about not doing it. Explanation. Next stage, give an example. Okay, so with this particular group, we'd recently done I wish plus past perfect. So I thought, okay, kill two birds with one stone here. I'll give an example on the board. Yeah, last year I forgot my mum's birthday. Bad son. True story. And I felt really guilty about forgetting her birthday. Okay, I wrote this up on the board. I asked, why ing? Yeah, preposition. I felt really guilty about forgetting my mum's birthday. I wish I hadn't. Yeah, you don't need to say forgotten. You can just say, I wish I hadn't done it. Okay? So, exemplification, examples, showing grammar and vocabulary in combination to give more information about how the vocabulary works. And then what I do is think about how can I use the class to expand upon this and to check they've understood it. So what I then do is to say, okay, anything else that maybe you feel really guilty about. And the students will shout all kinds of random things out. So they might say, cake. It's like, yeah, did you eat too much? How much? Half a cake. Oh dear, you're going to get fat, you are. So yeah, I feel really guilty about eating that extra slice of cake this morning. What I said to him. What you said to who? My boss. What did you say to your boss? Oh, seriously, God. And you've still got a job. You're lucky. I feel really guilty about what I said to my boss. I wish I hadn't done it. Okay. The beauty of these questions is some of them may be personal examples. Some of them may just be, you know, ideas students have about things people sometimes feel guilty about based on their world knowledge. Sometimes what happens is students shout things out and you kind of think, no, that doesn't work here. Okay. So recently I did this and one of my students said, losing his phone number. And I'm thinking, you feel guilty about losing someone's phone number? No. Well, what's the context, Kimiko? I then had this long story from one of my Japanese students who went to a party, met this guy, Brazilian guy, really fancied him, very good looking guy. They were flirting. They swapped phone numbers. He left. She stayed. She got very drunk. She got the night bus home. She woke up. She realized she'd missed her stop. She rushed off the bus. She somehow managed to get home. She woke up the next morning with a terrible hangover and realized she'd left her bag on the bus with her phone in it. And now she'd never see him again. Amazing story. It gave me an insight into the life of this student that I'm teaching, but it's not an example of feeling guilty. It's an example of regretting things. Okay, so we then had a little thing about, yeah, so here I really regret drinking that much. I shouldn't have done it. I really regret losing his number. I'm such an idiot. Anything else you can really regret? Yes, I really regret not studying more English when I was at school. That's why you're in the intermediate class. Sorry to remind you. And again, asking these kinds of questions leaves space for students, for their lives, for their ideas, for their humour, for their experiences to come to the fore. I think this skill of learning to ask questions about the language you're looking at that generate connected language is one of the most important ways I've improved my own teaching. When I was a younger teacher, I was really terrible at asking these questions. Having done a CELTA, I used to ask these idiot Ccqs, and I'll talk about this in a minute. I think what you need to think about is the meaning is only part of what students need to know, okay? They also need to know about collocation, about colligation, the grammar that goes with the words you're teaching. They need to know about usage, context, all of that kind of stuff. When I was a much younger teacher, what I used to do when I was going through answers to exercises is ask concept checking questions, the dreaded Ccqs. So it would be something like, you know, I'd be going through and saying, right, number one, yeah, he got kicked out of the team. Okay, good. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? And students would kind of go, bad. And I'd say, right, so was he in the team before? Yeah. Is he in the team now? No. Good, well done. Okay, good, good. The problem with these questions is they don't really check the meaning. I mean, there are lots of reasons why you can be in a team before and not be in a team now, apart from getting kicked out. You may have got dropped. You may just have got bored and got fed up with playing the game and left. It doesn't really check much. And for a student, there's no level of challenge, there's no level of interest, and you're not teaching anything extra about the word. So now when I'm going through is to say, right, okay, so number one, yeah, you got kicked out of the team. And if you get kicked out of a team, who by? Yeah, the coach usually. And if you get kicked out of a team by the coach, why? Yeah, maybe you're late for training all the time. Okay, maybe you've got a bad attitude. Maybe you bad mouth the coach. You answer back to the coach. So you get kicked out. Any other reasons? Yeah, maybe you get caught smoking. Okay, that happened to a goalkeeper at my football team, Arsenal. Wojciech Szczesny, the Polish keeper. He started out really well at Arsenal, but in the end, he got kicked out of the team because he got caught smoking in the showers. Silly boy. Anything else you can be kicked out of apart from a team? Yeah, you can be kicked out of your apartment or your house. Who by? Well, it could be your landlord. Yeah. Why? Maybe you haven't been paying the rent. Okay. Maybe you've been having loud parties and the neighbours have been complaining about you. Anyone else you can be kicked out by? Yeah, it could be you can be kicked out by your wife or your husband. Why? Or you could be kicked out by your parents. Why? Okay. So again, when you're asking those questions, it's much more involving from the student's point of view. You recycle and revisit more grammar, you know, present perfect continuous. Yeah, he got kicked out of his flat by the landlord because he hasn't been paying his rent. Okay. He got kicked out of the house by his wife because she found out he's been having an affair. Okay. So you recycle extra bits of grammar. Sometimes really funny stories come up from students. Once I asked this to a group, anything else you can be kicked out of? And one of the Swedish guys in my class looked a bit sheepish, a bit embarrassed and said, yeah, you can be kicked out of a nightclub. Yeah, you can, Magnus. Who by? What do you call these big, scary guys? So, yeah, bouncers. Yeah, the bouncers, yeah. So, yeah, he got kicked out of a nightclub by the bouncers for what? Magnus said, for example, okay, only for example, throwing up in the middle of the dance floor. It's like, oh, Magnus, it's a very specific example. One of the other Swedish guys then said, his first night in London. It's like, I see. Say no more. Your secret is safe with me. So, for example, okay, you could get kicked out of a nightclub by the bouncers for throwing up in the middle of the dance floor. Thanks for sharing. And that example will be much more memorable and much more meaningful to that class than just to get kicked out of. Negative phrasal verb, okay? It gives them a lot more information and it leaves more space for comedy, for stories, for interaction, and for extra examples of the language, the grammar and vocab combined to emerge. Whew. So finally, the fifth, and obviously not really the final golden rule, but let's call it the final one for now. Students need to practice. And I think the best way of doing this is to do revision kind of discussions, probably in the next lesson, based on things that have come up in the last lesson. So what I might do is just make a little questionnaire like this. And at the beginning of the next lesson, I'll put students in pairs or breakout rooms and say, okay, you're going to discuss these questions, your answers, your stories, your life. Has anyone you know ever been kicked out of anything? Because obviously it would never happen to you. When was the last time you went on a day trip? Where'd you go? What was the last thing you felt guilty about and why? Okay. And again, what that allows students to do is to connect that language to their own lives in a meaningful and personal way, which makes the language more relevant, more real, more motivating, I think. I'm going to stop in a minute and see if anyone has any questions. But can I just say, first of all, please do check out our website, www.lexicallab.com, to find out more about our online advanced level language courses. Most of the students we teach are language teachers themselves. So we're teaching kind of advanced proficiency, post-proficiency level students, fresh material every week, focusing on intelligent conversation and language development. Please feel free to get in touch with me if you want copies of the slides or you want to ask anything. It's hugh@lexicallab.com. If you're on Facebook, you can find us and follow us and like us, Lexical Lab Limited. We're also on Instagram, lexical_lab, and I'm on VK as well. We're also on YouTube as Lexical Lab. So please do find and follow us. Have a look at what we offer. On the Lexical Lab site, we also have some teacher development courses that you can do online yourself in your own time, at your leisure, maybe over the summer. So I think what I'll now do is turn it over to you and see if anyone has any questions. I'll apologize again for all of the technical screw-ups earlier. Almost certainly down to me being a technological idiot. And thank you to Anna for her patience and tolerance in allowing us to make this happen. Okay, and thank you to everyone here for bearing with me. So let's have a look. How should we expand collocations when teaching low levels? Yeah, I'll repeat the address as well. They don't have enough vocab to express their experience. So I think you expand them in a range of different ways. Sometimes you have exercises which specifically look at collocations, okay? Lexicallab.com. Yeah, it's up there. In a range of different ways. You have vocab exercises which develop collocations. When students are trying to say something, if there's a collocation that you think fits, you teach it then. When they're reading, you draw their attention to collocations. I think what you don't do is try to teach all the collocations at one time, okay? what students know about words is always developing. In your first language as well, it's true, okay? Our knowledge of the language is always provisional and it's always developing. So say at pre-intermediate level, I would expect that by that stage, you've probably learned, I have a problem, I have a big problem, I have a problem with something or other, you know, my landlord, I have a problem with my teacher, I have a problem with this platform. I would expect they might know things like, I need to sort out this problem, okay? At advanced level, they're still learning things, you know, they're still learning, oh, it's the re-emergence of a perennial problem that's blighted our country for years. That's still just using the word problem, but you're layering what you can do with it, okay? So I think it's always thinking about adding to what students know already about words they've already studied and not trying to do too much. What I wouldn't do at pre-int is to say, you can tackle a problem and solve a problem and sort out a problem and just one thing at a time, you know, learn one or two things at this stage to help you talk about whatever it is you're talking about and get better using that over time, okay? Ccqs, yeah, basically Ccqs only work for grammar, I think. So, you know, if you're teaching the present perfect simple, you might ask, you know, I've been to Bali. Is that talking about the past, the present, or the future? Good. The past. Do we know when in the past? No. Good. So we use the present perfect simple to talk about an action in the indefinite past. Okay, that works fine. That kind of closed questions. With vocab, they just don't work, because what's important about vocabulary isn't the concept. I mean, as a teacher, you need to be able to explain the meaning of the vocabulary in the context in which students encounter it. That's the least of your problems. What's important then is, what do you do with it? How does it work? Can you show me some examples? And to get better at that, you need to ask better questions, okay? So I don't know, this morning I was doing my proficiency level class, and I think maybe for the first time ever, I taught the expression, the onus, okay, like the responsibility. We were talking about conflict resolution, and one student was saying both sides need to come to the table ready to compromise. And one of the other students said, no. The aggressor, basically, is the main person who's responsible. So the onus is on the aggressor to make the first move, okay? The responsibility lies with the aggressor. Another example, okay? When you're renting, the onus is on the landlord to, and then we elicited some ideas, you know, ensure the apartment is habitable, for example. And so it's just basically asking, you know, if you're a landlord, the onus is on you to do what? Yeah. So you can get kicked out of a team for being late all the time, or for mouthing, you know, bad mouthing the coach. Anything else you can be kicked out of. Those kind of questions go much further, because they allow you to explore all the language around that language, and they use the students to generate the ideas. And what you then do as a teacher is dress those ideas up in better language. The worst possible teacher's mistakes teaching lexically. Trying to teach too much at once, I would say. Obsessing about production. I don't think you should expect students to immediately produce the language that you've taught them. I mean, it's nice if they do, but a lot of language is going to be receptive or passive, particularly at upper intermediate or advanced levels. Yeah, and I guess the other probable biggest mistake that I see is kind of trying to do too much at once, I think, is the biggest problem. You know, so it's trying to teach 15 collocations of problem all at once. Or maybe it's still teaching collocations or chunks, but not thinking enough about how those words are used. So maybe you kind of write, you know, to have an axe to grind. Well, that's great, but what do you want students to do with that? Well, what's an example? How does that phrase work? So it might be something like, you know, environmentalists don't have a political axe to grind. They just want to save the planet. And thinking again about a couple of examples of how you might use that. So I think it's probably not thinking enough about contexts of use and not thinking enough about, you know, the way in which words work. So let's just see if anyone has any other questions. Okay. I'm just also going to add in there our Instagram. Feel free to follow us on Instagram. While I'm waiting to see if you've got any other questions. Let's see. Hey, while I'm here, I might as well add in our YouTube link as well. Please do go to the YouTube one and subscribe and follow us. I'll just wait 1 minute to see if there's anything else that's come up. And yeah, sorry, now I can see, I couldn't see the comments earlier because I was stuck in presentation mode. Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry. So let's see. Thank you. Enough. Got to love a comment right at the end of a presentation which says, hello. Hello. Any advice for C1 vocab level improvement? Well, obviously, I'd recommend doing an advanced level language course with Lexical Lab would be my main thing. Yeah, I think basically when you get to C1, it's all vocab. I mean, the difference between like Cambridge Advanced and Cambridge Proficiency is almost nothing to do with grammar. It's to do with literally doubling the amount of language you know. Do a good language course, use some good vocab self-study books. I think things like Idioms Organizer by John Wright, I think it is a really excellent book. Read a lot, watch a lot, and basically work out ways of tracking your own vocabulary progress. Sorry about the crazy background noise here. We're having some building work done downstairs and the house is a bomb site. Yeah, I mean, it's basically just, it's all vocab. And I think you need to just work out ways of, you know, improving your vocabulary and developing your language load. 1 second. I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples. This morning in my class, I mean, the kind of things that came up. This is basically what I'm doing when I'm doing those kind of level classes is lots of speaking and then working from the things that come up from the students. And usually what that means is listening to the way students are expressing themselves and helping them to try to say things better. Okay. So in my class this morning, here's just a very brief sample. I mean, it's interesting when you hear these kind of things, you realize again, that vocab, that the grammar really isn't the problem. Okay. So here are some examples. It's been really muggy all week here, really humid, present perfect simple. And then we had the mother of all thunderstorms last night. Me and my boyfriend had the mother of all arguments last night. I'm just winding you up. I'm just messing with you. Present continuous. I was really taken aback by all the news about families living on the breadline. Past simple, an ing clause, or being reliant on food banks. I don't think I'd fully grasped the extreme disparity in incomes or the extent of the gap between rich and poor. Okay, I mean, that's advanced level, proficiency level spoken language. Grammatically, you've studied all of that stuff by intermediate already. So I think it's just, you know, learning a lot more spoken language. Is it a must to know lots of idioms and phrases? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a must to know lots of language for C1 students. and idioms and phrasal verbs are a normal everyday part of language, okay? I think the problem sometimes students make is, or the problem they have is, they only learn phrasal verbs or they only learn idioms. And a lot of stuff is this kind of weird mixture. So, I mean, looking through here, it's things like the story has been passed down from generation to generation. So, you know, it's a kind of phrasal verb, but it's also a kind of chunk passed down from generation to generation. Then you've got things like, my English has come on a lot. My English has come on in leaps and bounds. Is that an idiom or a chunk or a phrase or a phrasal verb with an adverbial? Does it matter? But, you know, your skills come on in leaps and bounds. Yeah. One of my friends said my English has come on in leaps and bounds. That was a real ego boost. That was a real confidence boost. It gave me a really good grounding. Okay. So again, that's not really an idiom or a phrasal verb. It's like a collocational chunk, but it's advanced level English. And then some things are just like, you know, I often just lose myself in a good book. It helps take me away from my own little world. Yeah. Sometimes I get a bit overwhelmed by it. It can all be a bit much sometimes. I may be showing my age here, but if you ask me, TikTok is too hyped up. I don't get what all the fuss is about. Again, it's this sort of weird mixture of idioms and phrasal verbs and chunks and phrases and just normal ways of saying things with the grammar and the vocabulary always combined. And the more of that you know, the more of that you're exposed to, the more of that you have recycled, the more of that you revisit, the better you get. And there is no end point. Okay, I think the other important thing to remember is there's no end point. It doesn't end. You get to C2, well, then there's D1 and D2 and E1 and E2. Yeah, it never ends. There's always more language to learn, just as there is for you in your own first language, I'm sure. Whew. So let's see what else comes up, if anything. I'll wait a couple more minutes to see if there's any more questions. Sorry again about the noise. Oh, today, what a day. Technical problems, building problems. It's 30 degrees, it's muggy. Yeah, not sure Moscow's looking that likely, Anna, to be honest. Yeah, we'll see. At the moment, Russia still has a quarantine policy of 2 weeks for incoming people. And as long as that is in place, I think I basically can't come in. So we'll wait and see, Anna. What's the difference between chunks and collocations? Well, I mean, technically, a collocation is a verb which goes with a noun or an adjective that goes with a noun. So, you know, heavy traffic is a collocation. It's an adjective noun collocation. Bitterly disappointed is an adverb adjective collocation. You know, I don't know. Make a mistake is a verb noun collocation. Chunks are usually just groups of words which go together. But, you know, lots of collocations are basically groups of words which go together. I mean, when I'm teaching, I don't use any of this terminology. I just say, these words go together. Okay, and keep it very, very simple. I think the exact arguments about where's the line where one thing ends and another thing begins it's a fairly boring academic argument that I'm not that interested in personally. Just, you know, it's important to notice words which often go together. Oh, okay, I think I'm going to end the stream there. Do feel free to email me. I'll just put my email in one more time. If anyone wants copies of the slides or anything like that, or if you have any questions that you suddenly think of at 2 o'clock in the morning tonight, and you think, oh, I should have asked that question, feel free to drop me a line. And yeah, I'm always happy to hear from people. Do have a look at the Lexical Lab website. And thank you all for your patience and for sticking with me. despite all the technical cock-ups. And a huge thanks to Anna from SkyTeach for dealing with my temper tantrum earlier, as I was getting very pissed off at being unable to access the room. So thank you, and keep in touch and take care.